key concept 5.2 for you today of the revised edition. This is the most up-to-date video you will find for the APUSH curriculum. Before we begin, it's shout-out time. Shout-outs to the following classes: Mr. Long's in New Mexico, Mr. Walsh's in North Carolina, Mr. Vitasek's in Vancouver, British Columbia, so cool, and Mrs. Gilliam's class in Texas. Thank you all so very much for watching. Best of luck this year. All right, let's take a look at key concept 5.2. It states, intensified by expansion and deepening regional divisions, debates over slavery and other economic, cultural, and political issues led the nation into civil war. I have lots of videos in the description, so if there's anything in here you want more detail on, check it out. Lots of stuff in this video. Now, some big idea questions that you should be able to answer. Why did various government actions regarding the issue of slavery fail? And why did the election of 1860 lead to secession by South Carolina and other states? That is a very important event in U.S. history. All right, Roman numeral 1 states ideological and economic differences over slavery produced an array of diverging responses from Americans in the North and the South. So really in the antebellum period, and antebellum means pre-Civil War, there are two emerging economies that are very disparate in America. And in the North, we have manufacturing that relied on free labor. In the South, we have agriculture that is reliant heavily on slavery, especially for cotton. The South's nickname during this time is King Cotton because the economy is so dependent upon it. We have a free soil movement, and this emerges, and the free soil movement, it sought to keep slavery from expanding. And the Free Soil Party's slogan was free labor, free soil, free men. And it was coined by this dude, Salmon P. Chase, who goes on to be Lincoln's Treasury Secretary and the 6th Supreme Court Chief Justice. He was also from Cincinnati, Ohio. And the Free Soil movement really focused their efforts into the land that is gained from the Mexican Cession, so that land out west. And they believed that slavery was incompatible with free labor, mostly because it took away jobs and economic opportunities from whites. All right, let's talk about an abolitionist movement. It was made up of whites and blacks, and although we tend to think that the North was against slavery, most people in the North would not consider themselves abolitionists. They really made up a small percentage of the people in the North. There are various tactics that they used. They would use things like moral arguments, this idea that slavery is incompatible with natural rights and all men are created equal, and the Enlightenment ideas that were used decades before. They would help assist slaves in their escapes, most notably the Underground Railroad. You have Harriet Tubman, the very famous conductor on the Underground Railroad that made dozens of trips back to the South to help slaves escape. And here's a map of the Underground Railroad. You'll notice the end result here is going to be Canada. So a lot of the cities where it kind of ends are right on the border with Canada. Here where I live in Buffalo, Niagara Falls is right over here. And this played a huge role in the Underground Railroad because Canada was right there. There's also a willingness to use violence. You see this at John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry, which he took over a federal arsenal and hoping to eliminate slavery. And the South responded with various arguments that would be used to defend slavery. They would use racial doctrines. And this argued that African Americans, like Native Americans before them, were seen as savages, that they were less of humans. John C. Calhoun and others argued that slavery was a positive good, that slaves actually had it better off than northern factory workers. And they also pointed to the Constitution, and they believed that slavery was protected by states' rights. And the Supreme Court in the court case Dred Scott versus Sanford, which we'll talk about in just a moment, stated that property couldn't be taken away without due process, and slaves were therefore deemed property. So the South argued that slavery was upheld and protected by the Constitution and through states' rights. Okay, Roman numeral 2 states that debates over slavery came to dominate political discussions in the 1850s, and this culminated in the bitter election of 1860 and the secession of southern states. So we have the Mexican Cession. When the U.S. won the Mexican-American War, they gained all this land out in the present-day southwest portion of the United States. And this led to debates over slavery. And nowhere do we see this more so than the Wilmot Proviso. This was an amendment to a bill during the Mexican-American War introduced by David Wilmot, and he sought to ban slavery in the Mexican Cession. This is the idea of the Free Soil Party, the idea of keeping slavery from spreading. Now, of note, it's important to note that the Wilmot Proviso will pass the House, but it does not pass the Senate. And the reason it passes the House is there are more people living in the North, where the North has an advantage in the House, but they do not have an advantage in the Senate because at this time, the number of states were equal. So the Wilmot Proviso sought to keep slavery from spreading, and the South did everything in its power to keep that from passing. Definitely know that this, to me, is screaming a stimulus for a multiple choice question or even a short answer question. If you're writing an essay about slavery, this is something you want to include as well. Okay, so let's talk about attempts to resolve slavery issue in the territories. Through the courts, we have the Dred Scott versus Sanford case, and here is Dred Scott. He was a slave who sued for his freedom because he had been taken to a free territory, and the Supreme Court ruled that African Americans, both free and slave, were deemed not to be citizens of the United States, and they could not sue. This is a very similar outcome to the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia Supreme Court case, in which John Marshall stated that Native Americans were not citizens and could not sue. Furthermore, the Supreme Court under Roger B. Taney declared that slaves were considered property and they could not be taken away. I mentioned that earlier. The Fifth Amendment states that individuals cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. And finally, the Supreme Court also said that Congress could not regulate slavery in the territories. So that Missouri Compromise, which was already overturned by the Kansas-Nebraska Act, is now officially dead. And this is in 1857. And this really infuriates the North. They begin to view it as more of an opinion, not necessarily something set in stone. And this really creates a lot of tensions between the North and the South. And this will also split the Democratic Party along sectional lines. You'll see people like Stephen Douglas in the North get a lot of support, but he will not get support from Democrats in the South. Continuing with the attempts, we have national leaders, people like Henry Clay and Stephen Douglas with the Compromise of 1850. Major parts that you should know: California was added as a free state, and this will tip the balance in favor of the free states. The slave trade was abolished in Washington, D.C., not slavery, but the slave trade. And the reason why was there were a lot of foreign dignitaries who would come to Washington, D.C. and would be horrified at the slave trade. We have popular sovereignty in the Mexican Cession, which allowed people living there to vote whether or not the territory should be free or slave. And we also have the passage of a more strict fugitive slave law. This is the most controversial part of the Compromise of 1850. This states that Northerners had to actively become involved in the retrieval of runaway slaves. Many Northerners didn't like this, and they passed personal liberty laws, which forbid the use of courtrooms and jails for the retrieval of runaway slaves. That's essentially nullifying a federal law, and the South would be very upset with it. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, a few years later, was created by Stephen Douglas, and this allowed for popular sovereignty in Kansas and Nebraska. And the expectation was, this unwritten rule was, that Kansas would be slave and Nebraska would be free. Now, it's important to note that both of these are located in the Louisiana Purchase territory, and both of them are above that 3630 line. So this essentially reverses the Missouri Compromise. And this helped lead to the creation of the Republican Party because so many people were upset with this act and they wanted to keep slavery from spreading. That's going to be the platform of the Republican Party, to keep slavery from spreading. So we have the end of the second party system. The Whig Party ceases to exist. And this occurs due to issues over slavery and anti-immigration sentiments. Again, keep in mind that Know-Nothing Party that we talked about in the last key concept video. This will lead to the emergence of sectional parties. We'll see this in the election of 1860 in just a moment. And the Republican Party will emerge, and it will become very popular in the North and the Midwest. This is made up of free soilers, again, people who want to keep slavery from expanding, and former Whigs. It is so important to note that in 1860, Lincoln's platform was the non-extension of slavery. He did not want to ban slavery. He wanted to keep it from extending. So in 1860, Lincoln will win on a free soil platform without a single Southern electoral vote from the South. So if you take a look here, and this picture will go away in just a second, all the green states here in the South, they are going to be the ones that eventually end up seceding, minus Maryland and Delaware over here. But they did not vote for Lincoln. He doesn't win a single electoral vote in the South. And the South will say, wait a minute, Lincoln wins and none of us voted for him. Therefore, we have no control over who the president is, so they leave. If you notice here, every state that voted against Lincoln is a slave-owning state, was a slave-owning state. He did not, I can't repeat this enough, want to end slavery but keep it from spreading. We'll see that change in the next key concept video, but for now, he does not want to end slavery. This is the immediate cause of the Civil War. If you see a question about what was the immediate cause of the Civil War, it's going to be the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. And South Carolina will secede on December 20th, 1860, and shortly after, many other states will follow suit. All right, let's go over some test tips for multiple choices short answer. Know the reasons for the decline of the second party system, characteristics of the Abolitionist Movement, different tactics that they used, the Compromise of 1850, Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the Dred Scott decision. All of them are fair game, and I have detailed videos on all of them in the description. And for essay topics, ways that the government sought to settle the issue of slavery. And that's going to come right back to these things right here. All right, guys, look forward to seeing you back here for Key Concept 5.3, where we will take a look at the reading of this very famous document in Lincoln's hand, the Emancipation Proclamation. Ooh, there's Salmon P. Chase from Cincinnati right there. We'll talk about him too. And I look forward to seeing you guys right back here. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.